Chapter 4. Rough Ride. The object which had struck Nancy was not heavy and had not injured her, but the sensation awakened her fully. She looked straight ahead and blinked in disbelief. 2 eyes were shining in the darkness. An animal! Quickly, Nancy felt under her pillow and pulled out a flashlight, which she always kept within reach when camping. She beamed it directly on the 2 eyes. Nah! Nah! A goat! It had been after the cookies and had knocked the box off the bureau. By this time, all the girls were awake, and flashlights shone from every cot. "Oh!" Julianne cried out. "How did he get in here?" One of the girls, Susan Miller, lighted a lantern, and the whole group began to giggle. Then they asked one another how the goat had managed to enter the house. Though the front and rear doors of the farmhouse had been closed, they were not locked. "And our bedroom door is open," added Julianne. "My guess is that some of the boys played a joke on us." Nancy spoke up. "If so, I guess it was meant for me, because just before the box of cookies fell on my head, someone called through the window here, 'Nancy Drew!'" By this time, she was trying to lead the goat from the room. Apparently remembering the cookies, he was reluctant to go. Nancy took a couple of them from the box and enticed the animal out of the house. She threw the cookies on the ground, gave him a gentle shove, then shut and locked the front door. Julianne had followed her and now decided to lock the rear door also. "It must have been the boys' doings," she said. "Who else would bother to come out here to play a joke?" Nancy agreed. The girls returned to their cots and all the lights were turned off. Fortunately, the disturbance had not awakened others who were in the house. In the morning, the boys arrived early, and Teresa held a short Sunday religious service before breakfast. As they ate, the boys were questioned about having played a joke on Nancy and the other girls the night before. All of them looked blank and denied having had any part in it. Julianne did not believe them and tried to get them to admit their guilt. The boys, however, insisted they knew nothing about the trick. Nancy had begun to believe them, and this brought a new worry to her mind. Was it possible that Kit Cadle had followed up his announcement that she and Julianne would be seeing him? It seemed to Nancy a logical conclusion. If the man was determined to find the hollow oak with the message in it, and had learned she had solved many mysteries, it was highly possible he was nearby to spy on her. He would try to intimidate her into leaving the area. She said nothing about it to Julianne or the others. While Nancy was speculating about Cadle, a farm truck came rattling into the yard. Everyone rushed outside. A tall, slender, slightly stooped man stepped to the ground. The goat, which had been munching grass and herbs, walked over to him. The man must be his owner, Nancy thought, as the stranger came forward. "Howdy, folks. Good morning. I see you got my goat." Several of the girls giggled. Art called out, "Did we?" The farmer paid no attention to Art's pun. He said, "I'm Clem Rucker, and I live a piece away from here. Somebody opened my goat pen last night and took out Sammy boy. Did one of you fellows do it?" The boys shook their heads. Nancy now explained what little she knew about the episode. Clem shrugged. "Some mysteries just ain't gonna be solved." His remark gave Nancy an idea. "Mr. Rucker, maybe you—" "Oh, call me Clem," the farmer said. "I ain't used to this mister stuff." Nancy grinned. "All right. I have a map showing where there's a certain oak tree I'd like to see. Will you wait a moment while I get the map?" She hurried into the farmhouse and was back in a couple of minutes. Nancy unfolded the sketch which the New York detective had made and showed it to Clem. He smiled. "I know all about this," he said. "You're looking for the secret message in the oak tree, same as them city detectives who were up here on their vacation." "Sure," he added. "Be glad to take you around. That is, if you don't mind riding in an old car." "I don't mind," Nancy replied. "Of course I'll pay you for the trip." The two arranged a price, and then Nancy turned to Julianne. "Could you get permission to go with me?" "I think so. Wait until I ask Teresa." While she was asking, Nancy inquired when Clem could pick them up. He gave a wide grin. "Soon as I get Sammy boy home, I'll bring my car over and away we'll go." Nancy was delighted that she could start work at once on the Hollow Oak mystery. She was glad, too, when Julianne received permission to accompany her. Sammy boy was lifted into the farm truck and Clem drove off. An hour later, the old man was back. Nancy and Julianne found it hard to keep from laughing aloud at the conveyance which was to take them on their detective trip. The car was a very old 4-passenger type with no top and had rather narrow wheels. Nancy thought, "This should be on exhibit in an antique car museum." The two girls climbed into the back seat and Clem drove off. The old car was amazing. Though the cushions were worn thin and the girls bounced up and down on the rough road, the engine purred along satisfactorily. Clem was a fast driver and did not seem to mind the bumpiness of the ride. A few minutes later, he turned off the road suddenly and started across a plowed field. The girls held on tightly. Clem pointed to his left. "See that little higher section with the corn growing on it? That was once a dig, and they found plenty of old Indian bones there." "It certainly doesn't look like much now," Julianne remarked. "That's right," said Clem. "Folks is funny. They make such a to-do about taking care of cemeteries, but they sure ain't got no respect for the skeletons of folks that lived around here 300 or 400 years ago." Nancy made no comment. She was deep in thought, recalling how carefully the Egyptians of thousands of years ago preserved their mummies. Her reflections were interrupted when Clem made a sharp right turn and drove up a slightly hilly section. "Was this an Indian gravesite?" Julianne asked. "I don't know," Clem replied. "So far as I've heard, nobody has ever come to dig it up." When he reached the top of the incline, which had not been cultivated and was covered with coarse grass, he stopped abruptly. "Here's the stump of that old oak you're looking for, Nancy," he said. Both girls hopped out of the car and went over to the stump. Nancy turned to Clem. "Where's the tree trunk?" He pointed down the slope. Among some bushes lay a giant tree. Nancy hurried down to it. Facing her was a small lead plate embedded in the trunk. On the plate had been etched Père François, 1675. Underneath the inscription was an arrow. The trunk was hollow, but the outer part was still in good condition. The tree that had stood at the top of the slope more than 300 years ago apparently had been blown over recently. Nancy remarked, "I understand that when the tree was standing, the arrow pointed east." Clem chuckled. "Now I just might be able to help you figure out that one." The girls watched him as he walked along the side of the tree, then climbed back to the stump. After 2 such trips, he said, "I reckon from the pattern of that stump and the bottom of this tree that they fitted together so the arrow pointed due east." "Can you drive us in that direction?" Nancy asked. "You never get anywhere if you don't try," Clem answered with a chuckle. They all climbed into his old car and he set off. Clem continued to drive through farms and woods. Once they forded a stream. but he avoided taking any roads, although they had crossed several of them. "Roads ain't much better in the fields," he explained with a grin. "Besides, they wind around too much. We can go quicker this way. I'm aiming for a nice picnic spot." "That's good," said Julianne. "I'm starved." 5 minutes later, Clem stopped near a stream and they all got out. Julianne and Nancy had packed enough lunch for all of them. Clem also started to open a package of food. "My wife Hortense," he said, "makes the best beaten biscuits you ever ate. Then she opens them and puts a little fish ball inside. I brought along some of them." The girls found the stuffed beaten biscuits delicious and said so. "Please tell your wife they're great," Nancy added. "And thanks to you both for supplying part of the lunch." While they ate, Clem told one exaggerated story after another and kept the girls laughing all the time. "One more and then we got to go," he said. "Once there was an Indian fishing in the Ohio River. That ain't a long way from here, you know. He was standing in the water with a club in his hand, getting ready to whack a fish when it swam past. Well, a fish come along all right, but before the Indian had a chance to whack it, the thing jumped right out of the water and knocked him over." "What a whopper!" Julianne exclaimed. "Now that ain't so much of a whopper as you might think," Clem replied. "We used to have catfish in the Ohio River as big as seals." Clem said there were no more big fish in the river, then abruptly changed the subject. "Would you like to see my good luck coin?" He drew a coin from his pocket, the size of a $50, and handed it to Nancy. The wording on the coin was so worn that she could not make it out, and reached into a pocket of her jeans for a magnifying glass. Nancy held it over the coin. A moment later, she asked excitedly, "Clem, do you know what it says on here?" End of chapter 4.